Let's go ahead and start the class. I'm going to pray to get it started so we don't lose too much time here. So let's pray. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for those methods of being able to communicate with each other face to face, both visually and audibly, that we can carry on our classes even though we're in confinement or at least separation from each other for battling the virus that's going around, and that everybody is healthy. We thank you for that, oh Lord. Those that aren't in the class yet, maybe they work out the technical difficulties and be able to join us and also log in. But tonight we have an interesting subject. So be with us in your spirit, oh Lord. Watch over us, teach us, give us your wisdom so we can understand the word, the knowledge that we're going to pull up and why it's here. And also that they may find a closer path to you, oh Lord, to knowing what your creation is all about, us humans, and understanding how they function and work and how we can relate to them and be able to spread your word easily to them to understand so they can accept your good graces and your truth. We thank you, Lord, for all that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. Did Alex make it back? Oh, I don't see him. Okay, tonight we're going to be covering chapter 7. It's emotions. What was the title of it? I got it. Emotions and feelings. Motion and feelings and motivation. I believe that's what it was. You get over here, get in front of it. Yeah, emotion, motivation, feeling, and striving. That's the title of it. I want to kind of put a footnote on this at the beginning, understanding that this textbook is as a secular textbook in psychology, and this one stands out in most parts pretty good, except for this chapter. And the reason I'm saying this author takes a very modern, how do I say, a modern approach to this issue of motivation and how we strive in life. And it's a very kind of left-wing liberal stance, and it's actually a part of what we're going to discuss later in social philosophy when you're in my philosophy class. So this is how it's showing up in our textbooks, but I'm going to walk through this, explain what it's trying to say to us, but I'm also going to critique it as we go along the way so you're not confused by its content. So there's a lot of places in here I disagree with it because I'm more of a conservative and old-time behaviorist. But this is the modern way they're trying to teach it now. So we understand, take it with a few grains of salt, realize that that's what you're going to be confronting as you see people that are in the younger generation. Anyway, just to give you a forenote on that so you can expect some curveballs in this chapter. But I'm going to present it the way he has, but then I'll critique it along the way. So don't get too upset with me if things don't sound quite right. They probably aren't. Okay, we got somebody here. Let me get him in here. Okay, let's get started. Let me give you just in that chapter outline first. And that's first one I'm going to talk about emotions. And I'll throw the PowerPoint up here, and you can follow along even if you can't hear me or can't talk back. So I'm going to share a screen with you in the PowerPoint. And then I'll do the talking in the background. Okay, this is a header, and these are learning objectives. What are different emotions? What causes emotions? How do we express and regulate our emotions? And how do we perceive emotions in others? That's how he starts out. Okay, well, these are all important characteristics. Let's see what he does with them. So, emotion, in the definition, is a psychological state with 4 components. There's a positive and a negative subjective experience. Now, this key word here, it is a subjective experience. It's not an objective experience. I mean, it's subjective according to the person who's experienced it. So that's a key to the kind of, how do I say, the nebulous field we're going into here. Second component is body arousal. Third is activation of specific mental processes and stored information. It does do that. It doesn't mean that it's organized, though. Okay. And then it carries on a characteristic behavior. So those are the four components. Different kinds of emotions have different kinds of characteristic behavior. So he starts, of course, with Darwin, the favorite one. Darwin observed similar emotional expressions in animals across human cultures and even in people that are blind from birth. That is true. Basic emotions are innate and shared by all humans. Yes and no. So they gave a list of emotions, and it's controversial. Some describe three types of disgust. So people that have a disgust about something, they can show three types. So the six basic emotions that Ekman and others identified and studied are these. The first one, of course, is happiness. I'm looking at the pictures, of course. Secondly is sadness. Third is fear. Fourth is anger. Fifth is surprise. And the last is disgust. And there's actually three expressions for being discussed. Okay, these are, as you rightfully stated, these are basics, pretty much basics for everyone. They're not always the same, exact same expression, but similar. But research has studied the effect of perception on the ability to read emotions with the following results. Now, these are studies that has the effect on perception, studied the effect of perception on the ability to read emotions. So now we got two big variables in here. One, that you're studying perceptions, which are very subjective and very hard to, they're not a concrete thing that you can measure. Everybody has a different perception about different experiences. So that makes it a difficult variable, extremely variable. And then we're studying on the ability to read emotions. In other words, when you say read emotion, again, that's a perception of what you see as an emotion or what you feel as emotion. And that's another subjective result. So you're taking a very subjective variable and using it to judge against another variable with the following results. And so here, these are what they say the results are. People can recognize emotions in their own culture easier than others. Now, I don't know what others mean. I think it probably means other cultures, except minority groups can recognize emotions in the minority group better, especially in those with experience. And that would make sense. I mean, you would expect that if you're in a minority group and they carry on the same characteristics of the minority group, their expressions and their emotions are going to be very similar because that's their upbringing. So that's their all, and especially if they have the same experience, they're going to have the same emotional impact and be able to read those easier because they've seen them more often. Status makes a difference. People react to emotions from their boss differently than from their colleagues. Okay, that's understandable. I think that can, everybody's had experience with that. I mean, they're gonna react different, not in their emotions may be expressed differently, but you're talking about the hierarchy of authority of who they're experiencing their emotions from. In other words, their boss carries more authority than just their colleagues do, or their children do. So in that some way, that's true, but it doesn't really state what it means. And certain responses are common across cultures, such as reacting to babies. Well, that would make sense. Most babies are active pretty much the same when they're still babies. They don't learn differences until later. So now we come on with this theory by JAMES-LANGE. JAMES-LANGE, two different people. We feel emotions after our body has reacted to a situation. Well, that's true. It comes after that. So the emotion comes after the situation, after the experience. So facial feedback hypothesis says this, and this supports JAMES-LANGE theory, stating that emotions arise partly as a result of facial muscle position. Well, that's hard to say, because you can replicate facial muscle positions and then ask them what emotion they're experiencing, and they'll tie the two together. But whether it causes or arises as a result of, that's the question. Which comes first? And that they didn't study. But critics assert that this theory does not fully explain emotions, and that's true, and ignores the fact that quadriplegics can feel emotions without much stimulus from their bodies. In other words, if you're a quadriplegic, with no arms and no legs, that you can still feel emotions without having stimulus from their bodies, from the parts of the limbs that are missing. So that doesn't really explain the whole physical thing, this physical experience to the emotion. And the reason is, this is Lange's theory, and it's in blocks here. First, you have an event, and then you have an arousal and physical changes, physiological changes, and then an interpretation of the physiological changes. In other words, the perception of that, in other words, and then that leads to an emotion. That's his block theory. So you can go over that and see what you think. But then there came on Kanan and Brad theory is this. The event, he says you have an event, and then you have arousal and psychological changes, and the event produces the emotion. And that's an odd way to put it. But he says emotions happen at the same time as the body reaction. In other words, he's saying the event triggers not only the facial expression, the muscles in the face that express it, but also the internal emotion comes at the same time. And one doesn't necessarily follow the other. Well, critics say that the theory relies on specific emotional brain centers that do not exist. And that's the problem, is that realize that there are special emotional brain centers, that there are parts in your brain that elicit emotions, elicit feelings. Well, we'll find out more about that as we go along. But there's quite a study in it of those. So really, what we're looking at here is what causes emotions. Now we have two theories that claim they know or have figured out what causes emotions. And there's some support for each one of them, but there's a lot of criticism to both. And I think I'm on a powerful, because there's a cognitive theory. Yeah, that's the next one. Now, cognitive theory of emotion goes this way. A cognitive theory holds that emotions arise from the interpretation of events. And then you have arousal and psychological change, which is our physiological change, I'm sorry. But all of these come from the interpretation of the events. That's the cognitive part. So it's a cognitive process that the emotions come from the interpretation. There's a perception of an event. And the perception of that event triggers the arousal and physiological changes. That's in other words, it's a learned experience. When we say it's cognitive, that means you've got a learned perception from the event previously that triggers its response. Okay, so let me come back and do some sharing here. So let me ask you a simple question. When you, let's take a simple one, I guess, I hope it's not too complex. If you get angry at someone, what causes you to get angry, to feel angry? Now, I'm not talking about what causes your reaction to it, and what actually causes the feeling, the emotion.
Professor Powell, would you ask your question again? I lost in those.
Okay, so when you get angry, what actually causes your feeling of anger?
Your thoughts.
Your thoughts, okay.
about the event.
Okay, your thoughts about future events. Okay, I got it, right? So you're recalling a previous event.
No, your thoughts about the current event.
Okay,
Your,
so it's your
your interpretation of the current event.
interpretation of the current event. Okay.
Yes.
Or could be the memory from the previous events, or the word of the events, and
Okay,
then
so
mix
something.
with the current.
Okay, so you're saying something about the current event triggers something in memory that causes it. Okay. Any other?
I think there are three kinds is cause: past, current, and future. If we lost somebody, spouse died, past, angry, and current also happening, car accident, angry, and then I very afraid of the future, maybe poverty, disease died. Also, my mind is something tumbling.
Good.
So
Okay,
maybe
good.
I guess three.
That's good. That's good. We got
Yeah,
something.
future loss of property or person or
Yeah.
something.
So let me give you an example. I want you to imagine that you're an old woman in an elevator, elderly, grandma, great grandma, something like that. You're in an elevator, and you're back toward the back of the elevator, and people, they stop at different floors, and people come in. They stop at this one floor, and this big, heavy-set guy, like kind of like a biker type, where he's got this leather jacket on with all the patches and stuff like that. He steps in the elevator backwards and steps on your toe. What emotion do you experience?
Pain and
Angry.
angry because he wasn't careful.
Okay.
Something angry.
Okay. That's good.
Anger.
So, anger, yeah. Sure,
Yeah, angry.
So you
That's
feel
true.
angry.
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because you feel like I know the Korean word for it, but I don't remember the English word for it.
What's it in Korean?
무시당하다.
Because
Oh,
because
you get angry because the biker guy hurt your pride.
Okay.
Yeah, wasn't careful. Wasn't careful.
Okay. Okay.
Disregarded the lady that she was present, that she should be careful.
Right.
That there's an elder lady, he should have been careful.
Okay. So let's change the scenario. You're still the old grandma on the back of the elevator, and instead of the biker guy steps in, you've got this little child holding the mother's hand, and the little child's like maybe 1 or 2 years old, just barely walking, does the same thing, steps on their foot, on your sore toe or whatever, steps on your foot, and the same amount of pain. How do you feel?
Not as angry. Just forgiving, because even though it's the pain, that the child doesn't know what he's doing.
Okay. That's most people's reaction. It's kind of like, it's not so bad. You don't necessarily get angry. You just have a sore foot.
And you kind of laugh it off.
And you kind of laugh it off. Okay, so the experience that you had was exactly the same. You got your foot stepped on. The same amount of pressure, same sore foot. So the injury to your foot is exactly the same, but the reaction is very different.
yeah.
So does it mean related to our expectation?
It's related to the components of the experience. And that's related to your perception of it. In other words, your perception of what happened changed, and therefore your emotion changed.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's something to consider. So when you get angry, the event and who participates in the event, and your experience of that similar event has to do with how you are angry, how much you're angry, and how you're angry, what kind of anger. Not necessarily the actual damage to you or the injury to you, but the other situations that surround it. And that changes the event.
Or things like she probably had a bad experience with a biker guy in the past who were rude to her.
Well, that's, yeah, even if you never had a direct experience, just watching TV will cause that.
That too.
Yeah. So you have those experiences. So you would be upset with them to begin with, just by the fact that you got in the elevator. You already started to get upset or worried or afraid or something of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a tendency to prejudge according to our past experiences. So because that prejudgment, that also leads us into a predetermined level of anger.
Question.
Yes.
What if like that scenario, I will still handle it like nicely. I will not show my anger to all the components, but to my own family, I will not control that. What is the deal? I mean, what's the issue?
Well, because your perceptions are changing it. Because one is your experience of emotion. Your act on the emotion is another part of it. And your control of your emotion is post to the event is another component to it. That's after the event. But that's your demonstration of your anger, not your feel. We're just now talking about the feeling, the emotion, not the acting on the emotion. Do you understand what I'm separating? In other words, all we're talking about is how you feel, right? And this was with this example, not how you're going to carry out that feeling, not what your behavior happens after that feeling. That again can be different.
It's interesting when I tell my 3 years old, because like he's having an anger issue like I was, or maybe I am. I tell him to replace, or how to carry out. When you have a feeling, you don't have to spill on somebody. You say, I don't like that. I try to switch, how he carry out to myself.
Right. In that case, you're controlling the outcome of your anger. See what I'm saying? You're controlling the behavior that's generated by your anger. But you can actually have control over it before that if you realize that the anger is more from your perception than it is actually from the event, and that you can change it. So you can preempt the anger. It's just like the old lady in the elevator. She's got two different responses to the exact same event. Two different responses to the exact same impact on her body. She got her foot stepped on. But her anger level is very different between the two. Anybody can do that if you know the sequence. So first you have an event, and then you have a perception of the event, and then that leads to an emotion. The perception of your event is from history. In other words, how many times you've experienced or what happened from previous events. And then that teaches you what kind of emotion you're going to have after that. Any of you had any kind of Eastern style, like Taekwondo, karate, any of that kind of training? No?
Yeah.
I would be surprised.
Taekwondo.
Taekwondo, maybe?
Yeah.
Well,
Taekwondo.
how do you say it, David?
But it's I little bit learn Taekwondo because
Yeah.
the Korean people is maybe in the army 1 or 2 months is learn taekwondo.
Uh-huh.
So I low level.
Yeah. So what's the prime thing that they teach you about emotion in Taekwondo?
Protect,
Protect it?
Check the emotion.
protect and manner.
Oh,
Gentle.
and manners. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Robert, you was going to say something.
Yeah. What he says is correct. Protect the emotion.
Protect the
Yeah.
emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Control it.
Control
Yeah,
it.
calm down. Yeah.
Yeah. Calm down. Calm down.
No angry. No angry,
Right.
no hurt. Don't hurt.
Well, I'll tell you why they tell you that as a psychologist. Because if you react with anger, you're predictable. Because people have predictable angry responses.
Yeah.
And if you're predictable in any kind of battle, you're dead. You lose. It's one thing you never want to be is predictable. In other words, if they know what move you're going to use next, they have a move against it. They have something they can do about it. They will make it to repel to you.
Counterattack. Yeah.
Yeah, counterattack. Right. So you don't want to get angry because that makes your next move predictable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it? That's why they train you for that, to control. But the important part is that they can control it. You can be trained to control your response to an event. It doesn't have to be automatic.
Yeah. And anger also a kind of protect mind. Because
It does,
yeah.
some kind of.
Yeah, disguise or protect anger. Maybe you can not hurt me. The defense, yeah, all kinds of angles.
Right.
Yeah, I saw it before a fight. The coach or the master slaps the fighter in the face.
Right.
And before the fight, so that he could control the anger.
Right. Puts him in control. Puts him in a control state.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's why. Because the anger will run you instead of you running what you need to do. Does that make sense for you guys? So the cognitive theory about emotions is that first you have an event that is similar to your experience to your. It's similar in experience to a perception or an event you had earlier and made a perception about, and then that triggers the response stronger than the actual event, the one you're experiencing right now. Make sense?
Well, say it one more time. I didn't catch it.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example. It'll be easier than just trying to put it words. Let's say you were abused as a child. I mean, since you were a few years old, or maybe a little older, and it happened all your life. It's just the unfairness of it all. And you got angry and angry and angry all the time, but you could never express it because it just got worse. If you yelled back or tried to fight back, you'd just get beat up more. So your experience of unfairness would be very, very sensitive. Mm-hmm. And your reaction to it would be much more violent, much more excessive. So as you grow up, if someone is unjust to you or strikes you in some way, your reaction is going to be almost uncontrolled and immediate because of your experience, your perception.
Exactly right. Yeah.
But not every person was whoever it was that abused you when you were young. And they may not be trying to do the same thing to you.
That's very interesting. Being abused equals to uncontrolling of when there's injustice,
Right.
and you got it. That makes a lot of sense because when
It's
there's
not
unfairness in your life, that
right.
triggers it.
It can trigger too. It's not only what triggers it, but it's also disproportionate, not triggering. And that's what often gets them in trouble. It becomes disproportionate or totally dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the cognitive theory about emotions. That it's not just the event that makes it emotional. It's the event plus the perception that then decides how you react to that event. How strongly you react to it, what emotion you may even have. It can be totally different. We have patients that had an abusive childhood and they don't get angry. They shift into a whole different personality. We had one famous client that they studied. She was abused as a child for quite a lot. And in order to survive, she ended up having 14 different personalities other than her own personality. So that makes 15. But she had 14 separate different personalities that she developed into in order to cope with the abuse. And they were very different personalities, and some knew the existence of others and some didn't know the existence of others.
Multiple personality disorder.
Yeah, multiple personality disorder.
Personality.
But it came from an abusive childhood. And that was her defense in order to not make the punishment worse that she was getting, because if she reacted to it, it would make matters a lot worse. So her safety valve was learned how to separate herself into these personalities. And that's what perceptions can do.
But is that healthy or unhealthy?
It's unhealthy. It's not healthy.
Well, it's better than being an angry, bitter, resentful person.
But
right?
that can be a personality in itself.
What do you mean?
Well, some of them can have a personality of just being an angry person, and they're not normally that way all the time. They're just that way in case one little thing triggers them, and they turn into that. It's not technically multiple personality, but it's pretty close to it.
Mm.
They're super violent. I mean, they can be the nicest person and not be violent, but all of a sudden something triggers it on the spur of the moment, something that triggers her past, triggers her perception, and he or she turns into a very violent person, excessively.
Like in the case where there's a murderer and everybody's shocked that he did something like that. They say, he's such a nice guy. Yeah, everybody knew him as being so nice. And then he ended up being a murderer. Yeah, that kind of
You
issue.
often hear that. Yeah, you often hear that. I personally counseled an abuse case where the husband was abusing the wife many, many times. I mean, she was in the hospital multiple times with serious injuries, broken bones and all kinds of things. Mm. And we went through counseling. I can't be too specific or with names, but what was happening was that she grew up that the only way she could get attention to feel loved and acceptable was to fight, was to irritate them so that they would fight. So her misperception of what love was to be abused. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's exactly what was going on in her mind. So when things were going really good, it was not comfortable. When the situation was what we call normal and just middle of the road, they got along well, that wasn't good enough. She didn't feel like she was loved anymore. So she would deliberately irritate the husband. I mean, really bad. I mean, things like standing right over and jabbing their finger into his chest while she was talking, until he finally couldn't take it anymore because he was borderline abuser anyway. But then they got in these huge fights. And many, like I say, many of them got her in the hospital. I think she was in the hospital, if I remember, like 8 times for serious injuries. And then the weird part was they'd make up and be great for a little while. But again, that's a perception of an event that's been twisted around. And that's what can happen to people. So when there's an emotional component that's really, really strong, it's important to look at what was the preceding events and what was their interpretation or their perception of those events, and how did they compound themselves to get so strong. Now, knowing that, the important part is here that that's one place that can be interceded in not causing an inappropriate emotional response. In other words, they need to go back and reevaluate the previous conclusions to events in a different way so that they had control over what they were getting out of the current event. Was it really what she thought it was, or was it just her thinking about what it was? It's like the woman in the elevator. She was upset and she was afraid of big bikers, guys. You know, they're really bad guys. They look rough and tough, and they got all the heavy boots on and leather jackets with spikes on it and everything, and tattoos all over. So already she's got her defenses up. So when she gets her foot stepped on, it's really an intrusion. It's an attack on her. And she responds accordingly. But it really, in reality, most biker guys aren't like that at all. I've known quite a few of them, and most of them are not. There's a few of them that go out and get drunk and they get violent, but that's only when they're drunk. When they're not drunk, they're great guys. They're just like anybody else. They just like to ride with each other on noisy bikes. But it's all about perception. It's not an automatic event to emotion that this book is trying to tell you. So the cognitive theory puts that perception level in between the event, the current event, and the emotion. And that's important to know that that's in there. Because we're not just uncontrollable, emotionally dependent people. We have a brain in between. In other words, we don't have a part of our brain that just elicits emotions without any process. Our emotions come from our perceptions of our cognitive processes. We figure that out, and we choose those. We decide those. That's why what the people are saying, or they're writing in here about not having a cognitive process in there is all about making decisions on emotions. But emotions are not the decisions. The emotions are a consequence of the decision, of misinterpreted perceptions. But nowadays, with this social philosophy we have, or social psychology that's going around rampantly, particularly out here in California and in other Western cities too, this liberal idea that you can make decisions on emotional, and that's a valid process of your mind, is incorrect. There's a cognitive process in between there that they're ignoring.
Professor.
So, yes.
So as an expert, how do you deal with the perception to carry out? How do you handle this emotion?
Well, you can decide. You can make a decision. You can reprocess that perception, the past perceptions, and what decisions you made from it. In other words, you have a cognitive process in your brain that's making decisions from events, past and present. In other words, you can decide how much something makes you angry. And then you also can decide how much you're going to respond to the level of anger that you're feeling as an emotion.
And I guess, as you were teaching in the past too, that you have to recognize where that emotion is coming from when it's not normal, that
Right.
Triggered by something in the past. And so you have to, if you acknowledge that, and then you could better, what you just said, confront that issue and decide that you're not going to go through that emotion.
Right. There is a reverse process, right? If the emotion that you're feeling or the reaction from the emotion that you're feeling is not appropriate, then you have to ask, why are you being inappropriate about it? What is going on in your own perception, your own cognitive process that makes it inappropriate? And then you can reverse that into the past, where you can pick up the events that triggered that. And that's part of what therapy is. I don't want to go into the therapeutical application, but you can do that yourself. Is that if it's not appropriate, then sit down and think about it. Why is your reaction not appropriate?
This class is very helpful for me because I do have that emotion that I, like you said, not too extreme, but I do have that issue where it triggers when there's unfairness, when there's when there's not unfairness, I get really angry. More so than what most people would consider, So I see where that is coming from the past.
That's good. So if you can see where it's coming from in the past, then you can redecide the past decisions. In other words, you have an event, you can't change the event, that's history. But you can change the perception that grew out of that event. In other words, you can take yourself back there as an adult and say, would you make that same decision today with that past event? Most of the time, probably not. So then you can change the effect of that event.
So it means like, because the scripture always remind me is slow to anger. So whatever you say is like you have to be perceptive and you to make decision and you carry out. So I realized just most time I thought the temper or emotional is like I quick react. I just react.
Right. What I tell people is count to 10. Just count to 10. If you get angry, stop doing, walk out, count to 10, and see if it's appropriate or not, and think about it. Just separate yourself from the event for as much as you can, and just count to 10. Don't react. Don't do anything until you get done counting 10. Give yourself time to process, because what happens a lot of times is it's so spontaneous. It isn't spontaneous. It's just you're programmed to react real fast. Slow that reaction down enough so you can think about it. Is it a valid option? Is it reasonable? And if it's not, then you can change it. You can do that anytime. But realize you have that option. You don't just have to be responsive, like reflex action. A lot of people do, but they often get themselves in a lot of trouble. I mean, how many of you would get into a fight with a policeman because he wants to give you a speeding ticket? That would be a little bit insane, because not only you're going to get a speeding ticket, you're going to go in jail a lot longer for assaulting a police officer, and you're not going to win that one either.
And that does happen.
But it does happen, yeah. Yeah, it does happen. Mm-hmm. I mean, some people get shot because they do that.
Yeah. I say, why would you do that?
Yeah, why would you do that? Yeah. So that's they've lost the connection, the cognitive connection when they do that. It's all reflex. And if you're doing something all out of reflex, you're dismissing a very important part about your brain, and that's the cognitive process. You guys are going to change it. David, you're going to have to up that thermos bottle or something.
David,
It's pretty squeaky.
이 소리 다 나.
So you have to use your brain to think about things, and in that process you can control your emotions, because you don't want to drive your behavior by your emotions only. I mean, emotions can be good or bad. Either way, you want to make sure you assess them properly before you act on them. But understanding how they form and where they come from is really important. And that's why I want to get and focus. That's why I focus this much time on the cognitive process, because the liberal psychologists and the liberal educators right now are not teaching that. They're teaching just deciding on emotions. That's a really dangerous thing to do. People do really crazy things and pretty dumb things if you're just acting on your emotions. And we see it every day. Oh, gotta let Alex back in. Alex is having a terrible time tonight. So, I mean, I've been talking about anger so as a good example, but there's many, many other examples that fit into the same category. That your past events and perception of events decide what you do in the current with another event that's very similar to the past events. Anytime you have that overlap, you usually have a tendency to use your perceptions to decide your action on the current event. And it may not be correct, because the situations change. Situations change every day. So you have to kind of be able to be flexible with your emotional reactions, because they may not be trustable, because they're based on, most of them are based on past events. Got to chat here a minute. Yeah, I know. Alex is still having trouble. I got you, Alex. Let's see. Let's move on. I think I covered all the cognitive. Let me see. Oh, you may have it on a PowerPoint. Let me pull on my PowerPoint and we'll finish that out. So on our PowerPoint here, we got the event, and then it arouses psychophysical changes, but it has an interpretation as a function of the context. That's the cognitive part of it. And then the emotion happens. So we call that perceptions. That functional context, that interpretation goes by perception. So what happens up here in the middle, I don't think you see my point on there. There's a misattribution of arousal, the failure to interpret signs of bodily arousal correctly.
Is that what?
Yeah, you have to join audio and start the video. So once you start video, they'll be able to see.
Oh yeah, Alice is back.
All right. Yeah, I got it.
Hey,
Finally.
you're back. You're back. Good.
Yeah.
You
All right.
down here will control your volume.
Yeah.
Video.
They were hiding.
Good.
Information was hiding.
Wow. We finally cracked it.
Yeah, congratulations.
I missed you guys, so sorry.
Okay, well, we know you were there. So the failure to interpret those bodily arousals correctly leads to an experience of emotions that ordinarily would not arise in that particular situation. So that's what we're talking about, appropriate responses to an emotion. That's the problem. So criticism about it is that not all emotions rely on cognitive interpretation. No, I agree with him. Not all emotions rely on that, but the greatest part of them do. And the ones that don't are really more positive emotions rather than negative emotions. Positive emotions, usually we don't really have that much cognitive interpretation about them. or at least we don't think about it because it's positive. We don't want to change them. There's no reason to change them because they're on the positive side. So even though it's criticism, it's kind of reinforcing the theory too. Let's go to. So what he does after going through all that part about cognitive theory, he then tries to fall back in the book, on textbook, about the synthesis theory of emotions. And this next slide that we're in. So it divides emotional states into different forms based on the role of the cognition. Makes sense? So basically take an event and it goes from brain and body reactions or memories and interpretation, and then that goes into emotion. Emotion can also trigger memories and interpretation. That's true, certain ones. So we say the emotions we feel rise from a mixture of brain-body reactions. I agree with that, and that's correct. But James Lange said, and interpretations by Cannon, Brad, and that are cognitive. So he gets part of it right because we do have some emotions which don't seem like they go through that cognitive process. But that cognitive process has had good experiences for those events and doesn't necessarily show up because you don't have any reason to question it. In other words, the cognitive process is working. And we don't have to go back and rearrange it because the emotions that come out of that event through our perception, through our cognitive process, are all turn out good. And that's what we want. We want to have accurate emotions for whatever the event is. And so you don't necessarily see that much of the cognitive process in there, and you're not going to need to disturb it or analyze it like you do the negative ones. If you have a negative, inappropriate emotion from an event, then it's important to go back and look at that cognitive process and its experience and perceptions from the past events that were similar. Now, I probably lost everybody with all that. So I'm going to come back and have a little sharing here. It's complex. It's not that it doesn't have a cognitive process for good emotions or bad emotions. It's that the good emotions don't need to be analyzed and will not need to be changed. So therefore, we don't investigate them as much. But the negative ones, we do because they're dysfunctional. They're not appropriate. So therefore, we spend most of our attention to deciding how to modify them, how to modify the ones that are dysfunctional or inappropriate so that they can be changed. And there we can go to the cognitive process and the imperfect perceptions we have connected to that. And that we do change. Now, the interesting part about this, now that I got you home, kind of muddled your brains on this, I'm just going to finish here with this, is that it's interesting that the Bible addresses those things. Just like John said, that JJ said, it's be slow to anger. And that's counting 1 to 10. I said, just be slow to anger. Don't be so immediately to feel a full power emotion of anger, especially anger. Okay, that's the worst one, because that one will get you in the most trouble of all, physical trouble. And the Bible says be slow to anger. It also says in a number of places to think about what you're doing, to plan what you're doing, to contemplate on things, to reference yourself back to the scriptures to give you guidance of how to do things. Not just react, not just do things on how you feel like it should be, whether it's fair or not. Is it just or is it unjust? If it's unjust, they don't say get angry. He says settle it. If you feel something unjust, then try to settle it. If somebody's treating you unjustly, then try to settle it with the one that's being unjust to you. Talk it out. In other words, reason. You don't go over and punch them in the face and say, hey, you owe me $100. Give it to me now because you didn't pay me. That's not right. You don't do that. You go work out something with them. You talk to them. before you go to the justice, before you go to court, or before you get a lawyer, because that's going to cost you a whole lot more, and the judge is going to make the decision for you instead of you. So those advices are in scriptures to teach us how to control our emotions, how to be patient, how to be reflective. Those are all components in there. They don't carry on the language of psychology or a modern philosophy, but they're in there nonetheless. It's good advice, and it short circuits the reflective, the emotion being a reflex from the event. In other words, it processes so fast that we don't really get a chance to think about it. But if we think back, okay, what will be the consequence of my reflective or reflexive emotion? What's that going to lead to? If I'm angry,
broken relationship.
Yeah, working relationship like that. In other words, just jumping because you feel like you're being unjust and you walk in, you're angry, it's probably not going to work out good.
You know, funny thing is people who have short fuse like that, they go, they deserve it. That's what they get. They hurt me, you know.
Yeah, something like that, right? That's how it comes out. Interesting thing that happened to me, to give you a personal example. My next door neighbor, where I lived for a while, I'm not there anymore, he had a daughter, and she was about, I think when they first moved, she was about 1.5. So I went over and talked to him a long time because we were good friends. And I talked to him, and I was beginning beginning to finish up my doctorate in psychology. So, and one of my specialties is child psychology too. So I went over and talked to him about how to be a good parent. So then I was teaching him, well, teach your child to talk about things, and you listen, you know, because sometimes they feel like things are unfair, and they may or may not be. You don't, you know, most people say, well, they say, well, why should I do that? And most parents say, because I told you so. Well, a child sees that as unfair. I mean, why you have so much authority? I just got to do something when I don't really want to do it. I don't think it's right. So I tell him, you know, just talk about it, and tell her she can talk about it, and explain to her to the best of her ability why that's being requested of her to do that. Anyway, I tried to teach him that and a lot of other things. Came out pretty good. Well, anyway, a few years later, the little girl went to started her first grade in school, and she got a call a few days later after she started. She got a call from the teacher, and they asked him he wanted to come in. He wanted the mother and father to come in to see her, and they got all worried because they thought something terrible happened. So they had a parent-teacher conference, and they went in, and the teacher wanted to tell her what had happened in class. And the teacher had put out a rule in class that they were supposed to do a certain thing. And the little girl didn't want to do it. That happens a lot. But the response was that this little girl, his daughter, went to the teacher and said, can we talk about this? And the teacher was just blown away by that. And she wanted to know, how in the world did this little girl, 5 years old, know how to do that? I mean, she never heard it before. So she was astounded that this little girl could do that. I mean, this is something you would hear from much later, at older age. So they went in and explained what happened. But that's how it works. This girl never got in fights, never got mad at everybody because she learned how to talk it out. And that's important. So it's easy to have emotional reflexes, but it's difficult to deal with them when they're inappropriate and the consequences are not good, even when it becomes in child rearing. Okay. let's see, it's quarter to 6, quarter to 7, sorry, quarter to 7. Let's take a break. 10 minutes. I'll meet you back. Okay. Okay, there's only a few more things I want to cover for tonight. So we'll just move down on that real quick. It's a few facts about fear, because I didn't talk too much about fear. Basically, you learn to fear something. We're innately, we're not fearful of most anything. We're not born with that. So fear can come up later in life as a kind of emotional reflex, but it's actually something we learned, because we know from babies that they're really not afraid of anything. They don't have any. So all the fear that we attribute to being afraid of something is all learned. And we see that often with people. They're afraid of things that they've never even been around. Just automatically, they say it's automatic. Well, it's not automatic. They learned it somehow, somewhere. And usually, once you associate fear with an object or situation, you apparently always does that all the time. So mental process can alter how easily the fear response occurs. Though we can change the mental process. We can desensitize people, so to speak, by changing that mental process. And the interesting part about it is we talked about there's no part of the brain that actually emotions come from, although they're usually attributed to a part we call the amygdala, center part of the brain, basic part of the brain, but it does not play a direct role in producing emotional feeling of fear. And neither the amygdala or any other single brain area always gives rise to a particular emotion. So there's no specific area that an emotion comes from, even fear. So that's really all I want to say, that the fear is all learned, and consequently can be unlearned. What makes a person happy is the next category. Well, sometimes there's all kinds of things that can give you a positive emotion of happiness. I think my PowerPoint comes in here someplace on that. Let's go back to that. Oops. Really? There we go. Okay, yeah, I just went through the part on the fear. Okay. Well, there's a number of things that we can roll out right away that makes people happy. Money. Sometimes, as when someone escapes poverty, money seems to be their center of happiness. But mostly it's life circumstances, such as how we are treated by those around us, contribute most to a person's happiness. But there has to be realistic expectations. Happy people do not crave what is not possible. So happy people realize there's a limitation. In other words, they have to have realistic expectations. If they go beyond that, then they're not usually happy. Also, you have to have social support, the degree which others help. In other words, you have to have people around you, and that helps a great deal to supporting happiness. It's like, say, it's very contagious. Not a good word right now, but happy people usually like to be around happy people. Second from last, there's personality. Optimistic people are happier, just because it's kind of a circle. Being optimistic makes you happy, and happy people are optimistic. They kind of go together hand in hand. And then there's what we call appealing activities, such as play and games and things like that. So those things make people happy. Pretty simple to figure that out. We've all been there. Okay, now the last one here I want to cover before we leave this section is displaying emotions. Well, display rules a culture, specifically rule that indicates when and to whom and how strong certain emotions can be shown. Cultures dictate how to display most emotions. So display goes by cultural rule. That's basically what the message is here. Depending on what country and what culture they have, certain things are just not displayed. And as you travel, you'll see that more and more. Body language, and body language is what we call nonverbal ways to communicate, such as emotions or sexual interests. And they also can vary by culture. So certain behaviors, certain body languages in certain countries are appropriate and some are not. So something to keep in mind as you travel and do mission work. How you use your body, how you demonstrate with your body, how you posture and things like that often have different meanings in different countries. If emotions are not regulated, the behavior that results may be problematic. We've talked about it already, so I won't go into that. But suppressing the behavior that arises from emotion rather than modifying it can result in reduced cognitive abilities. In other words, if you just suppress the behavior that arises from the emotions rather than modifying it, it can result in being more limited, let's say it that way. It's not the way to take care of it. It's best to take care of the cognitive part of how the emotions form so that the behavior does not arise. That's the easiest way. And I've been talking about that. Reinterpreting the situation in order to modify emotions prevents the negative cognitive effects of suppressing the emotion-driven behaviors. And again, that's another way to state what we've just been talking about for the last half hour or so. Different emotions selectively affect different aspects of cognition, especially working memory. So different emotions can affect how you can work cognitively and how you remember things. A lot of stress makes it difficult to be cognitively correct, and it's very difficult to remember things. That goes for studying too. Okay, so I'm gonna go run through this precede emotions. Okay, motivation, I'm gonna drop down to the section. Well, let me talk to you for a minute and then make sure everybody's got this. So everybody understand what I ran through there real quick about, there's 3 points. One, fears are learned. And a person is happy. They usually involve them in situations where it supports their happiness. So life circumstances can change, but they hang out with people that are realistic and support and are happy also. And they also do things that are happy to do, like having fun with the family, going out and see ball games or playing golf. Well, I wouldn't say golf makes you happy all the time, but it didn't me. But some people it does. But realistic expectations are really important. And that's a lot about what biblical things talk about. Is, not to be materialistic and wishing or being hung up on things that is not going to be beneficial to you or harmful. The other is displaying emotions. There's cultural rules for that, so you have to be careful. And then emotional regulation. If the emotions are not regulated, the behavior results can be problematic, and we talked about that before. There's consequences to inappropriate behavior, regardless of the emotion that triggers it. Okay, so that covers that part. Let's see where we're going next. We're going to start on part for motivation, and I'll be clearing up on that tonight. So let me jump back to the PowerPoint again. Okay, motivation and reward, being guided to our goals. Learning objectives. What are the sources of motivation? That's the one we want to do. And the other is, what is the difference between needs and wants, and what factors affect them? They're important. I think most of you know the answer to that one already. Okay, getting motivated. Motivation is a set of conditions and influences that lead an animal, including humans, to behave in a particular way at a particular time. That's motivation. Motivation can be set by a lot of different things, conditions and influences. First of all, and nextly, we have instinct. That's an inherited tendency to produce organized and unalterable responses to a particular stimuli. Yes, but we don't have many of them as humans. We don't have that kind of instinct. It's not an inherited tendency. We learn almost all of our tendencies. Then there's drive. That's an internal imbalance caused by the lack of a needed substance or condition that motivates animals and humans to try to restore balance. Yes, we have that. If things are out of balance, that we need something like you're hungry, it's a simple one, then you will have a drive or a desire to take care of that problem. And homeostasis is a process of maintaining a steady state. In other words, you're in a happy state, you want to stay in a happy state, you're trying to reach homeostasis. In a very stressful environment, it's very difficult. It's a big battle. Okay, so, this is Yerkes and Dodson law. Humans perform best at a moderate level of arousal. A moderate level. There has to be some, but moderate. So this comes about arousal theory and avoiding boredom and avoiding overload. If you go overload, it's not good, and boredom's not good. But some arousal motivates us. Okay. And that's why we have what's called incentives and rewards and needs and wants. So incentives, specifically, is a stimulus or event that draws humans, I'm going to leave the animal part out because we're not talking about animals here, we're talking about humans, to achieve particular goal in anticipation of a reward. So those are called incentives. They draw you toward it. I mean, you go to work because you get paid for it. No, you don't. That's not the only reason. Excuse me. Wow. Sorry about that. Got the scratch in my throat. So we receive rewards for like doing work in the form of money, but also we receive rewards in acknowledgement of what we do, or a pat on the back, or a good job from somebody. Those are also incentives. But a need is a condition that arises from the lack of a necessary substance, such as food or warmth. Needs give rise to drives. In other words, you're driven to take care of that need. A want, on the other hand, is a state that arises when you have an unmet goal that does not rise from a lack of necessity, substance, or condition. Bring goals into incentives. I don't think that's the right word in there. Somebody spelled that wrong. Anyway, we'll go through that. So wants and goals become incentives. You can join the two together. So here's needs and wants. It's got a flow chart here for you, so we can figure that out. The first one is a need. It's a condition that arises from a lack of a requirement, like food, for instance, and it leads to a drive, and the need gives rise to a drive to fulfill the need. In other words, some way to solve that problem of being hungry. And the reward is often relying on the deprived reward system. In other words, you get a reward and you're deprived. You're deprived, you get a reward when you achieve it. A want, on the other hand, is a desire resting on an unmet goal that will not fit a requirement. In other words, it's something that we want to achieve. It's not necessarily required of us to achieve, but we want to get there. We require it of ourselves, so to speak. It's not a physical requirement. But an incentive is the goal becomes an incentive to perform behaviors to achieve it. In other words, we can take the want and turn things into to incentivize it so that we can achieve what we want. And the reward is often rely on the undeprived reward system. the non-deprived rewards. In other words, you don't want it anymore, and that's the reward, is you don't strive for it anymore. Not always work quite that simple, though. So let's talk about the types of rewards. There's what's called a deprived reward. The reward occurs when an animal or human lacks a substance or condition necessary for survival, and then produces a substance or condition. That the reward is to fulfill the deprived need. An undeprived reward is when an animal or human has a want but not a need. That's an undeprived reward. It's pretty simple terminology, explains itself there.
I didn't know animals had that.
No, they don't. They can to some extent, but it's very basic. It's not as simple to define.
Like dogs. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, dogs will do things that they want, like because they're motivated for they're social beings, they're social animals, they're herding animals, so they need the herd to feel comfortable. When that's not around, it's actually a deprivation, and they're moved toward it. But if you look at it from the outside, it's not something that they need for survival. Yes.
The undeprived reward, that comes more with the process of our own desire, imagination. The more you learn, or more things that you dream of, you create that desire, no?
Yes, that's right. Right.
Like, because more simple the person is, less of that.
Right, that's right.
So it's very interesting that those are created by our own imagination and desire.
Right, and that can be a self-fulfilling cycle. We call it materialism or humanism. Is that people will get a job, earn enough money to really sustain them and take care of their needs. I mean, they have a place to live, they have food to eat, they have a few friends. But what happens is, after a while, it becomes beyond a need, it becomes a want. They want a bigger house, they want a fancier car, they want more lavishness. They get caught up in the want side rather than the need side, and it becomes cyclically motivating. In other words, their level of accomplishment or level of goal gets higher and higher, bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And it can go so far. Boy. Nature's crackers.
There is no limit to a human being. Their desire to achieve different goals, and now, I mean, I guess the Bible calls that, in a way, sin, for desiring more than what you need. But
it doesn't quite describe it that way, but I know what you mean. Yeah, you can end up getting wrapped up into an obsession of getting more and more money, so to speak, or more and more achievement, or a bigger and bigger house. I mean, Bill Gates got so many houses all over the place, I don't think he can count them all anymore. Like, everywhere he goes, he buys another house. Now, granted, he's got a lot of money to do that, but he doesn't need to own so many houses. And other people just have to have a bigger and bigger house. I mean, they're only one couple, but they live in 88,000 or 80,000 square feet or something like a house. I mean, what for? I mean, a lot of people enjoy it as a housekeepers.
Do you mean like some people, they got mixed up with what they want and what they need, so they turn out to be the same? They thought it's going to be the same thing, right?
Right. To be in the same area, right? Yeah.
So I mean, people strive for once they the needs are met, then they strive for something else. But that is the nature of mankind, no? I mean, it's not all
normally,
good, but that's the nature of mankind. We always strive for something more. If we have one, like a basketball star, you know, they got one championship, that he wants a second championship, a third championship, you know.
Right.
And so I guess what I'm going towards a question. How do you perceive that, Professor? How do you, because I'm going through that. And as you know, I've been talking to you about this subject for a little while now. In the past, the basic needs, you know, nice house, nice car is you know, and nice, you know, all the things that a family needs, those are all met. Now I'm striving for, and education is one of them. So, and this is great, but what I'm trying to get is, I guess this subject is really intriguing to me. How should I perceive this healthy, in a healthy manner, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when something like that gets into excess, is usually when it's no longer giving them peace. It's only providing happiness. Okay. And the problem with happiness is only temporary. If you find yourself striving for just temporary happiness, then you're going way beyond what your needs are. But as long as whatever you're striving for, even if it's just a want, you can move to a level of want where it provides happiness, but it's more permanent, and it actually becomes joy or peace in your life. In other words, it's good to have enough money where you feel secure, but beyond that, it can actually reverse itself and become more of a burden, and you're not happy anymore. And I've seen people do that. I mean, they start out not really poor, but they start out in, you know, middle class, lower middle class, and they get into lower upper class, and they're not happy anymore. It doesn't matter what they do, they're not happy anymore. I mean, it's like the amount of money you have is never enough to be happy. As a matter of fact, the more they make, the more upset they are about everything, and they don't treat anybody right. I think their life just falls apart.
A lot of them give that kind of testimony.
Yeah, all of them do. That's exactly what happens. It's common because they get so wrapped up in pushing themselves to have more material, and yet that material is not making them happy anymore. We have some very close people. They spend $1 million to remodel their backyard for the swimming pool with all the fancy stuff around it. $1 million. I mean, the pool was already there. It was really nice, and the yard and everything was really nice, but they wanted it better, and then they never used it. They don't even go out. They don't even go back there and look at it. The husband used to go out and use the jacuzzi, but he doesn't do it anymore. And they don't have anybody over anymore. So what was the deal? It's excess, that's why. And it doesn't make him happy after a while.
But like King Solomon says, you know, it's all but a breeze.
It's all vanity.
Vanity.
All vanity. After a while, it gets all vanity. So what is important is that we focus on what our needs are and make sure they're all met. And for your family, the needs are met, and safety and security is met. You got enough money to retire on securely, if you need to, and you can see through enough for the kids to get them started. Anything beyond that is not good. Okay, because they have to be trained into the same process too. So that is what is important. But it's not about getting excess amount. I mean, if you're just going after money or things or a bigger house or a bigger car or whatever, it's not gonna make anybody happy after a while. It moves beyond that. That's what you have to be careful of. That's the difference. It's between the difference between needs and wants. And again, I'll bring back the Bible. It said that. It said, don't worry about tomorrow. Today's enough. And God will provide for all your needs if you follow him. Yeah, they'll be there. But he's not going to give you a bunch of one, because he said a rich man's easier for a rich man to come to him than like putting a camel through the eye of a needle. Because he can't turn away from his rich. He's married, devoted to his rich. He's worshiping his money or his possession. That'll get you in trouble every time. So you have to caution how you do that. How much? How much is enough? That's the question you always want to ask you. How much is enough? If you keep saying, oh, a little more, then you haven't established that what's enough. Okay? Okay, I'll go back. Slide point. Okay, so let's see. We need to choosing rewards. No, let's see if we can move on past this. Types of needs. And there's learned happiness. Oops, learned happiness. Kind of covered most of that. Hunger and sex. Basically, there's two important motivators for humans and animals too, is hunger and sex. It's pretty simple. And it's fundamental to almost everything. Now, I'm not saying you should always use those for motivating people, but they're basic motivators and explain how it motivates. I'm getting you all mixed up here. You can use, well, let me give you an example with hunger. And it talks about metabolism. We're talking about what is hungry for your mind as compared to what is hungry for your body. Hungry for your body is a need, but hungry for your mind is a want. Can you see what I'm saying? When it comes to hunger, you can trick your mind into thinking that that you have to eat to take care of some other issue. Sometimes it's metabolism imbalance, but a lot of times that metabolism imbalance starts from the mind. There's just an issue going on that needs to be resolved. It's not necessarily a need to eat. It's not a need for you. Now, sometimes the body can get mixed up in what you're eating, how you metabolize, what kind of food you're eating, how you're eating. There's some other things that can come into play there. But we see a lot of overweight people, I mean grossly overweight, that is overweight mostly because of a psychological decision in there. I don't want to get too deep into that. But the feeling of hunger itself is basically comes from the lack of protein. In other words, your body can't measure sugars and fats as far as to give a hunger signal, but the lack of proteins it does. It sends a signal of hunger. A lot of us don't pay attention to that. What we pay attention to is how our stomach feels. So it's the last one there. The feeling of being full comes from sensors in the stomach that evaluate the food values of its contents. You can do that, but they're searching for protein. Your sensor in the stomach that feels and looks for it is in the bloodstream and in the stomach, but it only measures protein. And a lot of times if you eat a high calorie diet, you can still be hungry and still need feel the need to eat, but you won't end up eating enough protein to satisfy the sensors. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's one of the issues. So we have to be careful what we're doing with our bodies when it comes to hunger. And sex could be kind of the same thing. So we have these, and it talks about issues of what is what and food and all that. I don't want to get too far into that because I don't a limited amount of time. So overeating is when enough is not enough. Enough is not enough. And it's usually by metabolism or how we're reading our bodies. And then we come to the other one, the sexual behavior. The first systematic study on sexual behavior was attempted by Alfred Kinsey in the 1940s. There was much more studies after that. But he found that sexual activity is more common and varied than expected. And there's all kinds of problems with it. All kinds of problems and various responses. There's a lot of conflicts and sexual behavior throughout humanity. So I don't have time to go into each one of them, but they talk about the sexual response. People don't understand that, how it comes on and how it resolves. There's also the role of hormones, the chemicals secreted in the bloodstream, the endocrines, receptors that stimulate the neurons and other types of cells. The hormones also control the pituitary gland, which is basically called the master gland, which in turn controls the hypothalamus, and then all kinds of chemicals are then come out of that and are stimulated by that hypothalamus. And then we have the androgens, which are the sex hormones that lead the body to develop many male characteristics, such as beard growth and low voice. And then we have the estrogens, which are the sexual hormones that lead to body development and many of the female characteristics, such as breast and hip development, and organ development, stuff like that. So there's a chart here on motivation for sexual behavior, and you can go through that. I'm not going to deal with that in the class here. And then there's a list of key terms at the end. I think that pretty well covers. Let me drop out and we have a little discussion here. Just ran through that real quick because they're all adults here, so probably learned that somewhere along in school. Let's see, hold on. Oh, yeah, let me cover this because I didn't talk about I want to go into one other part about the needs. So I've got enough time? Yeah, okay. Maslow came out with a theory called the hierarchy of needs. And he said, this is Maslow, that felt that their needs need to be met in certain order. And there was a certain order they had to develop. And I'll give you the order. First, there was a physiological needs, like food, water, shelter, things like that. In other words, things we needed for to protect ourselves, feed ourselves, to maintain ourselves. And then when that was taken care of, then we had our safety needs, which were personal or emotional or like financial security at a later stage. And then we had a social belonging need, like friendships, intimacy, and family. And then fourthly, we had what we call an esteem, it's like self-esteem, being respected by others, by our peers, being respected. And then fifthly, we had self-actualization. Now, since Maslow, there's been a number of other work done, and one that I'm very familiar with, and that we regroup these. And we also find out that they're not necessarily in order. In other words, there's some that do come earlier than others, and there's a lot of conflict. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get mixed up in order. And I don't have a PowerPoint here handy to show you these, but I can go through them for you. So the first one is also the first in our five, what we call core needs, the 5 core needs. The first one, the physiological needs, safety and security, food, water, being taken care of. Those are what we call safety and security needs. They call them physiological. We call this safety and security. So safety and security was number 1. Again, these are not always met properly and can be out of order. And they have their second one called safety needs. We've combined together with safety and security. So 1 and 2 in Maslow's is actually number 1 in 5 core needs. Now, the reason, before I go finish listing all the cores, there's a reason why they're called cores, because each one decides at the very beginning what direction we're going to go as we develop. And how these core needs are met can either cause conflict of not being met properly or dysfunctionally, or one of the needs is traded off with another one. In other words, they can make decision to forego one need satisfaction as long as they have the other one. Or sometimes they say, well, we can't have one without the other. Or you can't have them both at the same time. So there's all kinds of relational dysfunctions that can happen between the 5 needs. So the first one is, first core need is safety and security. The next one is belongingness. And he calls it number 3, or social belonging. So you have to be able to belong to something. You have to have a group. As a child, that's mother. And if that situation goes well, it becomes a functional providing for the needs, and there's no threats to that, then they grow up satisfied in that need. And they figure out how to make that happen for them later in life. So that's belongingness, the need, we call that. The third one is not on there, and we call that autonomy. There's a need to have autonomy, to be yourself, to be able to do on your own, stand on your own, have your own ideas, and not be threatened by expressing those. We call those a need for autonomy. Okay. The next one is what we call, I'm sorry, jumped down my mind. It's a sexual relationship, but it's not as much as just having sex like we were talking about having a partner, but actually having a hierarchy of something to follow from you. In other words, like a family that come behind you. In other words, a hierarchy, let's put it that way, and a different name for it. But you have to have something that is good for you. You have to have something that you've developed, something to leave behind you, a monument or something like that. And usually that comes in developing a family. And the last one in our group is belonging to something greater than ourselves, to a higher purpose. In other words, there's something out there larger than ourselves, and that would be God, in other words. Here he listed as self-actualization. That's really not the right term. They actually are seeking a greater purpose, godly purpose. And those are 5 basic needs. Any one of those that don't get met, regardless of what time they get met, they're not necessarily one before the other, but all 5 of them have to be met in order to be a stable, normalized person. If they don't get met, then you have dysfunctions related to the need that's there, that the need's not being met, or they figure out dysfunctional ways of that making that seem like it happens. Now, the trick here is all of these 5 basic needs come from outside of us. We can't make it for ourselves. We can't create it for ourselves. The security there can't be created by us. It has to be created by outside of us. So it has to come from outside. So the trick is, how do we get the outside to fulfill that for us? That's the learning process. So as we grow up, we have to relate to our society and people around us in such a way that we can get those core needs satisfied. because we can't do it ourselves. It's not something we can do. In other words, if you don't feel safe and secure, going out and earning a lot of money is not going to make you safe and secure. What makes you safe and secure is that your society will provide the things that you need, the food and the water and the shelter and that kind of security. Now, we normally think of money as providing that, but it can also be cut off. Like when you want to buy a new toilet paper from Costco and it's not there. That's a big issue. If you think the only place you can buy toilet paper is in Costco, you've been really stressed out the last 2 weeks. And that could be a core issue for people. And has been, of course, even water. Why are people panicking over water in this area when they got all the water they need coming out of the tap in their house? Nobody turned it off. You got plenty of water. What's the issue about having water in a bottle? All you need is one bottle. You can fill it up anytime you want. So what's the problem? It's because they've never had that core needs figured out how to make it satisfied themselves. They've always relied on someone else to do it, but they haven't figured out how to get that someone else to do it for them, to volunteer. So they become dependent upon it, not comfortable with it. And that can be any one of the 5 core needs. If any one of them is not fulfilled from your society, from your environment, then you've got a big problem. And you fight about how to get that taken care of, because it doesn't feel good not having those core needs met. And that's like autonomy and belonging. Those are big issues for people when they grow up. They want to be autonomous, but they feel like that if they're autonomous, then they get rejected from society. They're not able to speak up for themselves. They're not able to be themselves in a group because the group tries to force them to be what they want them to be. So what happens in order to get their safety and security met, their belongingness met, they often have to give up being autonomous or make that decision. Of course, you have to remember these decisions are made very early on in growing up, early years, before 3. So that will also be a problem. So you'll see people that are very belonging needed, and they get their belonging needs met, but they're not autonomous. Those are people that get swept into cults because they love to belong. They get the belonging really easy, but they know they can't be autonomous in there. So if you get swept up in a cult-like environment, they'll take care of you really well. They'll make you feel like you belong to them really well, but you can't speak up against them. You can't have an opinion yourself. It won't fit. That's the wrong kind of environment. But people that don't know how to be autonomous and have belonging at the same time get swept up in that, and there's a lot of them. It's a huge percentage for the population. So that's how this core belief process works. That's what makes us function as human beings, but it's very hard to fulfill. Because when we learn how to fulfill them, we're often in a dysfunctional environment, or we're very young and we can't make those decisions. So when they grow up, they have belonging and autonomous needs, and they get into a relationship for marriage, a spouse. They'll end up in a dysfunctional relationship because they'll need to feel autonomous, but on the other hand, they don't feel like they can be autonomous, and they can't ask for it. Or if they need belonging and they're plenty autonomous in their belonging, but they can't ask for belongingness because they don't know how to ask for it. They don't know how to get it. They don't have control over it. See what I'm saying? It's like, okay, let me give you a simple example. Safety and security need. Let's say that you become dependent on carrots. You eat carrots every day. Every meal you eat carrots. And you always go to the same grocery store to buy carrots because they have good carrots. So you go there, it's convenient. You go there and you get your carrots and you're fine. All of a sudden, someday the store decides, tells you, Well, we're not going to carry any carrots anymore because you're the only one buying them, and it's not worth us to put them in the store. Now what do you do?
Find alternative.
Find an alternative. That's what most people do. But a person that has not learned that can't find an alternative because they've got a good place to go and they've always gone there for them. All their life they've gone there and they always had the best carrots and everywhere. They don't know, they never tried it before, but as far as I'm concerned, it works. So all of a sudden somebody says, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. You're in deep trouble if you don't know how to find other carrots.
Life is over.
What?
Life is over.
Yeah, switch to something else. You're in big trouble.
Yeah.
You're going to get really desperate really fast, just like toilet paper. I mean, this is a serious problem. I mean, people went nuts about toilet paper. Why do they go nuts about toilet paper? I mean, most of the people in the world are laughing like crazy. They think we're nuts.
Especially Koreans.
Especially Koreans. Yeah. A lot of other countries too. I mean, a lot of countries still to this day don't have toilet paper and they don't need it. Why would you waste good money on toilet paper for crying out loud? But we did. Americans here in California went absolutely bonkers when they didn't have toilet paper. I mean, something's fundamentally wrong. Very fundamentally wrong. Well, it's the first one, safety and security. So what happens is not that they just need toilet paper, that they go nuts over toilet paper. I mean, one guy went out and stole a whole truckload full of them for a semi-tractor trailer truck full of them. And people hoarding so much toilet paper, they probably won't use it for 10 years. That's insane. These people got a problem. And these are the people that are your neighbors. So that's what not learning how to fulfill a core need can do to people. It can very much disrupt them and make them very dysfunctional. I mean, I walked into one, I forget what store it was now, and like all the meat was gone. All the lunch meat was gone, all the sausages and stuff, all the prepared meats are all gone, all the chicken was gone, all the regular meats are gone. Guess what there was plenty of? Pork and chickens. I'm sorry, pork and turkeys. I mean, it looked like nobody bought any pork or any turkeys because the racks were packed full of pork shoulders and pork pieces, all kinds of pork, and a huge freezer full of turkeys. It's not even Thanksgiving and they got tons of turkeys. What's the deal?
There's probably not a Chinese area. Chinese love pork.
They don't need them. Well, the problem is they're not flexible enough to eat what's available. They're panicking over what they can't get, but they're ignoring what they can get. Serve the same purpose.
Is it possible that like most people, the lack of security, they will overreact more?
It is overreacting, but it's irrational overreacting. It's irrational. They're not starving. If they were starving, they would take the turkeys and the pork.
You know, it's funny, but we tend all to do the same thing once it comes to that kind of situation. We don't think of the second option or the third one. I don't know how, Professor, you're gonna put that, because once we get into certain situations that we don't even recognize that other things exist, you know, and we only see the one that we are comfortable with, and we just want to pick it and stick with that. I don't know what you would say about that.
Right, but that's what I'm talking about. Your core needs have to be flexible, just like we talked about the carrots. If you can't get carrots, you go someplace else, or you get a substitute.
Mm.
You don't panic because there's no sick carrots. See, that would not be a normal reaction. You say, well, what can I eat? What can I substitute for? Where else can I get something?
Yeah, actually, that one reminds me of a certain animal that back at home that I observed and I noticed. A donkey. A donkey, when a donkey can't find green pasture to feed on, it will feed on the cow dung, which is like of the cows that was long
you
ago.
find something else.
You find something else and eat it.
Yeah. And actually, cow dung is actually very nutritious.
Yep, it happened to be. So which is
it happens to be. I mean, it sounds pretty silly, but it happens to be. Makes good firewood too.
Yeah, that is true.
See? But you don't panic about it. The donkey doesn't panic about it. It's just second choice. And that's the difference. But that includes all 5 core needs. See? And that's how people can balance their needs. You have needs, and they're core to every human being. How you settle how those needs are met is extremely important, and that makes a balanced person. That's the lesson here. So when you meet people, first starting with yourself, when you think about yourself, what is it that you're most motivated for? What is it that you're most stressed about? And what area of those 5 cores is the cover? Most people don't have the 5th one, which is being part of a greater source, a God. And they don't even know what they're looking for most of the time. But they have it. It's still there. It's a core need. They may not have addressed it, but they've done something about it. And that something is what you need to be looking for, so that you can then replace it with the right thing. And that's what evangelism is. So that's an important thing to realize, that core need is already there. And the Bible says it's already there. Every man has a desire to have a God. Now, which one he picks, that's the problem. If they don't get the right one, then the rest of them are wrong. And they're often very destructive. But getting the right one, getting to recognize what is the right one, and then bringing that into themselves so they have the right direction to fulfill that core need is very important, especially as people get older. They're more sensitive to it missing. It's just like any other core needs. Humans are built with them.
What did you say? Sensitive to what?
That 5th core need, a higher being, God.
Yeah.
They're just as much sensitive as the water and the food and the safety and security.
More so.
Yeah, the core needs don't have a hierarchy. They're all equally important.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Oh, so yes. So as I went back to China, all of you know that the Chinese development, I mean, the economic grows so fast, but on the other side, the spiritual, their faith. When I talk to my friends in China, even they make a lot or maybe have a good reputation, a career, and all the symptom is like lack of confidence, and the bottom is like lack of faith, because they're not confident. Even when they talk, when they think, this is not confident, because they lack of a being they can rely on. And that's the symptom. When they find a being, they ask me, oh, JJ, why are you so confident what you're saying? Because that's the truth. That's what the Bible say.
Because it goes to autonomy.
Yes.
They don't have their own autonomy. And fulfilling that last one helps to fulfill autonomy. Some of them give up the autonomy in order to have the God, and some of them make God the autonomy. Neither one is functional. You have to have both. You have to have all 5, actually. Yeah. Okay, we're getting close to time. Let's call it a night. We'll go through this more as we go through psychology. So I'll bring up the 5 core needs again. But would someone like to close out tonight with a prayer? Okay, John.
Dear Jesus, thank you for this wonderful class, for Professor Powell and the work and effort and knowledge that he contribute to the entire class, and all by God's grace, so we can learn, so we can stay in such environments, stay informed, stay informative. And Jesus, help us to keep our eyes about all the wave, all the tribulation and hardship, to let our spirit find rest in your embrace. Because you are our Jesus, we love you, we trust you completely. Help us to love you more and abounding in your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, have a good night and a good week, and drive safe on the way home.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Professor, I just wanted to ask you in person, like you ask us to pick like a topic to write. Do we have to message you that to you directly, or we just like have to decide?
No, send me a note, Kakao or email, and just give me a short note of what your topic wants to be, and let me read it over, and I'll get back to you about it. I'll email you back or whatever.
All right. I don't have your Kakao, but I don't know how people get that, but I'll
It's
eventually
on the syllabus.
All right.
Yeah.
All right then.
Would it possible that you assign or you get us some options so we can pick?
I can, but I'd rather you do it.
Thank you.
All right.
Well,
Sounds good.
you better pick out what you were interested in. That would work better.
Where can we have an idea how we're gonna come up with the idea?
Out of your textbook.
Okay.
Anything in the textbook.
Anything?
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night. Good night.
Good night.